Good afternoon, everybody. We're now in session 7C. My name is Moa Wahlqvist, and I work as a researcher and a coordinator in Sweden, and I will moderate this session. And the title of this session is Moving Online During COVID-19, How It Affected Programming at Canadian Helen Keller Center. And our speaker is Laura Hayden, and she began working with the Canadian Helen Keller Center as a placement student at the training center in 2008. And when she graduated from the George Brown College Intervenor for Deafblind Persons program in 2009, where she received the Joan McTavish Award in memory of Mae Brown. She began working with the organization on full-time, and since then, Laura has held various roles within the deafblind community, including intervenor at Rotary Cheshire Apartments and at CHKC Training Center. She's an active participant within the organization, sitting on various committees. As of 2018, she holds the role of Consumer Programs Coordinator at the Training Center. And with that, I say welcome to the stage, Laura, to start your presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Laura, and I am a middle-aged white woman, fairly tall with brown hair, and I am currently wearing like a plum jacket. I see that there is various access needs in the audience, so if I am speaking too quickly or too slowly, please just raise your hand and let me know, and I will adjust accordingly. Thank you guys for coming today. As you can see, my presentation is moving online during COVID-19. I know that we probably all kind of want to forget that COVID-19 happened, but at the place where I work, at the CHKC Training Center, it's actually had a profound impact on the way that I run programming. So thank you guys all for coming today and hearing my presentation. I'm going to start just with a quick picture of the CHKC Training Center, and I show this picture because whenever I say we're a training center, people assume that we're in a large building. We are not. We are literally a house in a suburban neighborhood in Toronto, North York. This house, I will give you a small history of the house, but I just wanted everybody to have an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about the training center, the Canadian Helen Keller Training Center. Just a brief introduction. In 1998, a property was purchased at 210 Empress Avenue, where we are now, with the intention of opening a training center for individuals who are deafblind. The Canadian Helen Keller Center opened its doors in July 2001 to provide deafblind Canadians with training opportunities and services. In 2007, we secured funding from the Ministry of Community and Social Services to provide training, workshops, and senior support to individuals who are deafblind in the Toronto area specifically. In 2015, we actually increased our funding so that we could expand services all across the province of Ontario. This enabled individuals who are deafblind across the province with opportunities to learn new skills, to increase independence, and enable greater participation in their home community. So at the CHKC Training Center, we do offer a core set of programs that are fundamental to the way that we run our organization. So there are 5 core programming, and that is skills of daily living, including cooking, cleaning, home organization, budgeting, and things like that. We do computer essentials and technical devices. So that is things like computers, JAWS, refreshable braille displays, smartphones, things like that. We provide courses on adapted communication, such as sign language and two-hand manual, as well as braille and other tactile modes of communication. And then we also do orientation mobility training. The way that the programs run at the training center is that there are individualized classes that are provided at the training center itself, or you can have instructors come to your own home or in your own home community, because sometimes the training that we offer is more effective when it is in their own home. In addition to the one-on-one classes, we also offer a lot of clubs and workshops that happen at CHKC every month. These clubs provide an opportunity for learning as well as a very important opportunity for socializing within the deafblind community. Here's a list of some of the clubs and workshops that we do hold at the training center. This is not all of the clubs. This is a small section. So example of our monthly clubs include Meal Planning Club, Deafblind Peer Support Group, Chat Club, iOS Club, Advocacy Club, and Paint Club. And I will have more of an in-depth explanation of some of these clubs and how they changed during COVID-19. And so some of the workshops that we have included at the training center is emergency preparedness, what does racism display to you, all about lighting, and spring chocolate making. So you can see our workshops and our clubs are very diverse. They're not one specific focus. They are as diverse as the population that we work with. So now moving on to COVID-19. In the beginning, as you can see, the classes at the training center relied heavily on in-person instruction. Before COVID-19, all of our classes were in person. There was a lot of tactile information, there was a lot of touching, there was a lot of socializing and communication that happened that way. And also many of our clubs were popular because of the socializing that took place before and after. So on March 13th, 2020, CHKC Training Center made the decision to cancel all clubs and workshops, but still to allow one-on-one classes. And then on March 16th, so 3 days later, CHKC Training Center made the decision to cancel all in-person classes. So essentially, our training center was closed, and we were all at home. Which was interesting because this was not something that we were expecting, and we had never really thought about the way that the training center could exist if we couldn't provide in-person classes and workshops. So after a lot of thought and discussion with my coworkers, we came up with 4 main issues that were barriers in order for us to start programming again. And so with much of our province in lockdown and many of our consumers experiencing various degrees of isolation because we were in lockdown and lack of access to the programs that we regularly offered, what could the training center do to help? Like a lot of the population, so the 4 main issues. The first one, like a lot of the population, CHKC participants did not know how to use video conferencing programs like Zoom or Microsoft Teams. It was something that I'd never used before, and I am not a deafblind individual, and so our consumers had a very difficult time figuring out how to use these programs. As well, participants might not have access to technology that they would need to participate. So things like computers or iPads, they might not have had access to. And so it was a problem. If they wanted to participate, they needed to have access to these programs. Number 3, definitely the program that we decided to do all of our programming was Zoom. And one of the biggest problems was how to make Zoom accessible to all of our consumers. And the number 4 one, and the one that definitely made the biggest impact, was how the instructors would have to adapt their programming to be virtual only. So we're going to talk about the solutions to the 4 problems. The first solution was one of the first things that we did after about a month of brainstorming and researching and trying to figure out how we can offer programs again. The first workshop that we offered was a Zoom workshop, so how to access Zoom. This was difficult because in order to hold a workshop on how to access Zoom, you had to use Zoom. And so one of the first problems that we had was trying to give people basic information on how to access Zoom in order to do the Zoom workshop. And the way that we did this was a detailed email was sent out to the participants specifically on how to log on to Zoom. And the first 15 minutes of the workshop was making sure all of the participants were able to access the information that was being given. And I say 15 minutes, but I'm probably going to say it was at least a half an hour because it was new not only to me, but to everybody else. And it was something that we didn't realize is that Zoom presents differently depending on which device you're using. And so it was a lot of figuring out how people could access things on their specific devices. So this workshop included things like how to connect to Zoom, different parts of Zoom, including audio and camera settings, accessibility solutions, and how to pin and spotlight. And I would like to say that we have figured all of those things out now, but it is still a challenge. Every time Zoom does an update, everything changes just a little bit, and it can be difficult to keep up with those changes. So this is just a short example. It's a picture of the workshop that I held. It says how to access accessibility functions on the computer. And then it just gives an example of the instructions that was there. Go to your logon screen, locate the setting button on the top right-hand corner of the screen if you are on a computer, and then there was different instructions if you were on an iPhone or a tablet. And then from this Zoom workshop, we actually developed a set of guidelines for all of our instructors at the training center when they were using Zoom. And I'm just going to read them out because this is something that we still use pretty frequently. It just makes sure that all of our Zoom meetings are standard, has a standard set of rules throughout our organization, and so that all of the speakers know what to expect, all of the instructors know what to expect, and then all of the participants also know what to expect. So the first one is begin each Zoom session by introducing all of the instructors and the participants, and this one is very important, just so that we know exactly who was in the call. And so instructors and participants, but we also have to make sure that the participants know who the intervenors are in the Zoom call, as well as if there's any interpreters or placement students. Like every person that is on a Zoom call, it is important for people to know who it is. Instructors and participants should say their name and their sign name if they have one, as well as their intervenors' names and sign names. Also important, just so everybody has the same knowledge of who is in the Zoom call. So when speaking, make sure that you are in a quiet place with no background noise. If possible, stay close to your computer or tablet microphone, or use an external microphone. That one was because in the beginning we were having a lot of issues with people not being able to hear each other if they were in a loud room or if they were using a computer microphone or a tablet microphone that wasn't good quality. So another important one was placing all participants on mute to help with background noise. That was another huge change that we noticed when we started doing that. If participants wanted to speak, they should either put up their hand or use the raise hand function. When participants is done speaking, they should place themselves on mute again. Also ensure that all speakers identify themselves before they start talking. And instructors and participants were to speak slowly and wait to others for finish before speaking or taking yourself off mute. Speak at an even pace and clearly with breaks as needed to keep the pacing of the meeting accessible for everyone. Make sure the area you're using is well lit and that you can be seen clearly, and if possible, try to be against a solid background. That one was quite difficult because I don't know if many of you guys used Zoom. I never realized how many parts of my house didn't have a solid background until I started using Zoom. And so everybody had a very difficult time trying to figure out areas in their house that were solid, but it worked for the most part. So yes, the next one is if an instructor or a participant is sharing a screen or using a whiteboard function, be sure to describe what is shown on that screen. That was especially important during the beginning of Zoom because their accessibility features were not what they are now, and if someone was using a screen reader, they were not able to see what was being written down in the chat function or on a whiteboard. If you have any written material, it should be forwarded to the participants beforehand, and that was just to make sure that everybody had the accessible material. This one was very important, especially in the beginning, was to arrive to all meetings at least 10 minutes early and encourage everyone to arrive early in case there are any issues with connecting to Zoom. In the beginning, I say 10 minutes, but we probably should have all arrived a half an hour early, just because all meetings were shortened just because of accessibility needs. But that did definitely get a lot better as the pandemic progressed. And the last one is limit the use of the chat function, whiteboard, and polling, since these features are not fully accessible, and I spoke about that earlier. The next solution for the number 2 was an easy one. It's pretty short. It is purchasing technology. So because there were some consumers who did not have access to technology, what we did as an organization is that we purchased a number of iPads, and we decided on iPads just so that it was easy for everybody to know how to access Zoom. All of our instructors, all of our intervenors could have the same training. So if someone was borrowing an iPad, then they would know how to use Zoom on an iPad. And so these consumers could borrow these iPads and use Zoom or other video conferencing apps that were already installed. And consumers could borrow the iPad for like the duration of the meeting if they lived in the apartment buildings, or they could borrow the iPad for however long that they needed. And some people borrowed it for 6 months, some people borrowed it for 2 months. It was basically there in order for them to be able to access our workshops as much as they could. The next solution was hiring interpreters and understanding how Zoom worked. So before the pandemic, we relied mostly on intervenors to provide communication for our population. But as we started to move online, it became more difficult for consumers to get the intervenors that they needed, and so the solution that we had was to hire sign language interpreters for all Zoom clubs and workshops. That way, if anybody wanted to participate in any of our clubs or workshops, they were able to join and know that there was an ASL interpreter available for them to watch if needed. And this ensured that participants who may not have had access to intervenors during this time would be able to participate fully in the classes. And the next one was Zoom updated their program throughout the time that we were online. And CHKC needed to understand how to make these online clubs accessible while still ensuring the program instructions were consistent for the participants. A big one was using spotlighting versus pinning. I don't know how many people are familiar with Zoom, but many of our consumers didn't want to be responsible for pinning the interpreters themselves. And so we worked on a lot of different solutions on how to spotlight people. In the beginning, you couldn't spotlight more than one person, and then Zoom made many updates to make it more accessible. And so that was definitely a process that we are still working on. And the last one was adapting to virtual-only clubs and workshops, and that was 100% the reason why many of our programs were so successful during the time that we were closed was because of our instructors. So I am the consumer programs coordinator at the training center, and while I do run some programming, a lot of the programming that we do have is because of instructors that we hire. They all did an amazing job of adapting and developing their programs, and I'm just going to give you guys a couple of examples of the ways that they did that. The first one that we will talk about is Meal Planning Club. And so before the CHKC Training Center went virtual, the Meal Planning Club was a once-a-month club where participants paid a small fee and came to the training center to make at least 3 different meals that they could take home and put in their freezer or eat throughout the week. And so the consumers would come to the training center and do the activity and then leave. But during the time that CHKC was closed, obviously they couldn't come to the training center, but that doesn't mean that the need for the club diminished. And so people still wanted to have homemade meals. They still wanted to have meals that they had prepared ahead of time. And so what our instructor did, they would begin purchasing the ingredients for the participants and then deliver it directly to their house. She would then videotape herself making the food, describing the instructions using voice and ASL, and then she would then email the participants a copy of the video for them to follow along with at home. And for anybody who's thinking that's a lot of work, it was. It was an extreme amount of work. Not only was she having to do so, she would videotape herself, and then she would look at the video and use that video as a voiceover reference, and then she would describe it, and then she would go over afterwards and actually sign it. And so she was basically having to make 3 different videos for one class. And so this is what the instructor had to say about these changes. I'm appreciative that I was able to continue my programming in an adaptive way, and that CHKC supported this idea, but if they had to do it again, the biggest challenge we had in our class is that our class is hands-on and preparing meals, and we couldn't really do that. Other issues were online meant consumers were only able to make 1 meal, and the time to produce the video and edit it with no experience doing that was large. And so Meal Planning Club is actually an example of a club that we did not continue having hybrid because it was not the idea of the club. And so now that the center is fully open again, Meal Planning Club has moved back to a completely in-person model. But it is interesting if someone came to us and they were not able to get to the training center because they lived far away from Toronto, we would have like a framework in order to make sure that they could still get accessible meals, instructions on how to make these meals. The next example is Paint Club. And so at Paint Club, the instructors selected a painting based on the interests of the group and gives a step-by-step instructions on how to complete it, while also completing the painting herself. And so I don't know if anybody has ever done the sip, the wine and dine, where you paint a painting and you drink wine. So it was basically that without the wine. Is one of our most popular clubs. It still is. And so participants would follow along and complete their own painting. And so before the pandemic, this was a completely in-person club. But during the pandemic, the instructor had to develop a way to continue while online only. So she would set up 2 separate computers and have 2 different Zoom windows open at the same time. One Zoom window would show the completed painting, while the other would show the instructor painting along. And so she would alternate between having the video camera focused on the painting that she was doing, and then also having it on her, focused on her face when she was talking. And so if the instructor needed to use ASL or had a longer description, she would flip the camera up to show her face so that communication could happen that way. And another adaptation was the instructor would also prepare the supplies ahead of time and drop them off to the participants if they didn't live too far away. For those who participated outside of the GTA, so the Greater Toronto Area, she would forward them a list of supplies that they needed and they would get it themselves. Paint Club is actually one of the biggest successes of the pandemic. We had participants join that lived outside of the Greater Toronto Area and had never been able to join programming before. And so Paint Club continues to be a hybrid club. And so now instead of, the only big change is that the instructor has set up 3 cameras instead of 2. So one for the completed painting, one to follow along, and one to show the participants that have began to come back to the training center to join in person. And I have a picture here to show you the setup. And so this is just a screenshot of a Zoom call. On the right-hand side, there is a picture of the completed painting, and that was the Paint Club that they did in June. It is a rainbow on a blue sky with like a silhouette of a tree and some grass at the bottom. And then right to the left of it, directly to the left of it, is a blank canvas. And so this is before the class had started. It's just showing you the way that she would paint along so you could see what she was doing and how she would complete the painting. And then on the bottom of the screen is a picture of one of the rooms at the training center, and it is set up ready for the participants to come. There's easels and tables and paint supplies that are ready. And so when there would be participants there, anybody online could still interact with them if they were online, because they could watch what everybody was doing on Zoom. And another one of our big successes is Deafblind Peer Support Group. And it is a club that was started specifically during the time that the training center was closed. And this was because there was a great need to help with isolation and to maintain connection within the deafblind community. It is run by our consumer relations coordinator, who you guys might have seen. It's Elio. He's the tall man wearing purple yesterday. And it reaches participants both inside and outside of the Greater Toronto Area. And here's the part of the email that is sent to the group each month. And come and try the new virtual Deafblind Peer Support Group. Why have this group? It's important to continue to support each other. COVID-19 and social distancing can make us feel lonely and isolated, and it is important for us to have social contacts to help us feel happy and stay positive. It's important to keep communication within our community, and it would give us a chance to watch and listen and share. And this group is so popular that we actually have to hold 2 different sessions of it. One is during the afternoon and one is in the evening. And we chose the evening specifically so individuals who do work during the day have an ability to participate after they're finished work. And it is very important specifically for this club to have an ASL interpreter, since some of the participants do not receive a lot of intervention hours, and they can still participate, and they still do continue to participate. And so this club specifically is one of our only clubs that continues to be an online-only club, and that is because many of the participants do not live within the Greater Toronto Area. They participate from all over Canada, which I think is amazing. And the last club that we're going to talk about is a little bit more of a fun social club, and that is bingo. During the beginning of the pandemic, when many of the city was in lockdown, the training center decided to hold bi-weekly bingo games to encourage people to participate and reduce isolation. These games were online and in person with social distancing rules in effect, but as our rules changed within Toronto, they actually eventually moved to online only. The participants would use their own bingo card, and the caller would voice the numbers and type in the Zoom chat window, and then another person would sign the numbers so that those who use ASL could also follow along. And then the winners would pick a gift card of their choice that would be emailed to them, so it would remain completely virtual and we wouldn't have to be close to each other. Bingo is still hybrid, with some participants joining us from many places throughout Ontario, and then some people still enjoy joining us at the training center. And here's a picture of bingo. This was in the beginning when we were still able to participate with socially distanced. And so you'll see a picture of the bingo wheel, which we don't actually use anymore. It is an online website, but it is a Zoom call as well. And so there's 4 participants who I have blurred out just for privacy, and then myself calling the numbers. I don't do it anymore, but I used to in the beginning of the pandemic. And then on the side, you'll see the chat window is open, and it basically just has all of the numbers. And so I'm going to quickly talk about workshops because we don't have that much time left. One of the unforeseen benefits of moving online only was the ability to ask speakers to do workshops who were not in around the Greater Toronto Area. These expanded the types of workshops that we could offer and give a great variety to the participants. We had presenters from BC, Jen, Montreal, Minnesota, and London, to name a few. As well, if you remember the picture of our training center, we are not huge, we are quite small, and it is limited by space, so often our more popular workshops had to have a limit to the participants. So when offering online-only workshop, this was not an issue. Any deafblind individual who wanted to was able to join. CHKC continues to offer hybrid workshops when available. So for example, if we were to run an emergency preparedness workshop, that would be hybrid, but if we were to run chocolate making, that would be more difficult, and that would be an in-person one. I just want to quickly talk. Not everything was a success. I was talking a lot about all of the benefits, but there was actually many, many challenges. Technology was a constant issue. Spotty Wi-Fi was a huge problem, bad audio, poor lighting, and then the inability to access Zoom. There were many clubs that were started during the pandemics that did not succeed. This was due to many factors. A lot of it was people didn't want to come because they had problems with technology. A lot of them had reduced intervenor hours because intervenors were not given as much access because of safety needs due to COVID, and lack of interest in content without the additional ability to socialize. I began to realize that a lot of the clubs that were popular before were popular because of the people who were there. And people wanted to join if their friends were joining, and they wanted to see their friends, and they wanted to talk during breaks. And if they didn't have that ability, or that ability was decreased, and then they didn't want to join the clubs. And I get that. It wasn't anything that was awful, it was just an unintended understanding during COVID. And one of the strangest examples I will give, and then that'll be the end, and there'll be questions available, was the Christmas craft workshop that I put on. I had everything planned. I had all of the supplies ready. I made sure that the craft was accessible to everybody. I drove all of the supplies to people's houses, and I started to make it, and the glue that I had given everybody didn't hold anything. And so not only did the glue not hold, it was unbelievably difficult for the participants to understand the instructions that I was giving without the additional support of an intervenor. And so I got about 20 minutes into the workshop until I realized that it just wasn't ever going to work. And so we stopped it early, and I apologize. And I have yet to ever do an online craft club thing ever again. So that is ongoing changes. I forgot. There's one last slide. This changes to our programming is actually, as I said before, it definitely changed the way that I do offer programming. It allowed us to access a larger group of people from across the province, as well as Canada as a whole. It allowed us to tap into a larger group of instructors to broaden our learning opportunities. The ability to have larger groups of people meet online because we didn't have to worry about space when there was no physical room available. Some of our clubs are still offered in a hybrid model. I'd say about 35%, three-quarters of our clubs are still offered in hybrid. Well, about a quarter, it just didn't make sense, and so it's moved to an in-person only. And now we have a large group of interpreters that are available to be on call if needed virtually, that we did not have before. And that is all. Thank you guys so much for coming today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Laura. So I will take this microphone, and if you have questions, I will come to you. And I see a hand raised. And please tell your name and where you're from.
Thank you for a nice presentation. My name is Mattias Ehn. I'm from Sweden. I'm also involved in a project where we are looking for the experiences of people with deafblindness during COVID-19. So it was very interesting to hear. I wonder whether some activities that you did not consider going online with.
Yeah, I mean, all activities that I didn't think before pandemic happened, we had discussed moving online anyways, because Canada is large, and even Ontario, to get from where we are to the top of where we know that there are deafblind consumers, is about 10 hours away. And so I thought that we couldn't hold any classes online, and now we have held all of them online to varying degrees of success. There is something that I would never do again. Mostly food-related things did not work out well, and craft-related things did not work out well. Like for the instructors, they can plan and they can, try and organize instructions to be as clear as possible, but it just never fully manifested the way that you thought it would. But I'd like to say no, because we did it, and to varying degrees of success. I don't think that if someone came up to me and said, I don't think that you can hold a virtual petting zoo, I would say I don't know how much fun it would be, but we can try. And it might not be tactile, and it might not be, as sensory as it would be if you were doing it in person. But instead of saying a virtual petting zoo, you can be like, well, someone can see the animals, and instead of focusing on the tactile aspects, maybe you can focus on the information. You can say, this is a baby duck, and this is what the baby duck looks like, and did you know? And then give facts. And so it might not be the same as it would have been before, but it wouldn't be applicable. Whether someone would find that interesting, I don't know. I am constantly surprised, even to this day, things that people will find interesting and won't. There are tons of programs that I offer that I am absolutely sure that are going to be super popular, and they end up having 1 or 2 people show up. And then there are other programs that I think will fizzle before I even start, and they are some of our most popular programs. And so I have learned a long time ago to never discount any programming ever, because you never know what's going to work. So, thank you.
Thank you, Moa here. More questions? Was that yeah? It doesn't have to be questions, it can be reflections as well, I guess.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Brittany, so I'm actually the activities coordinator for Sun City.
Oh.
So just it's so interesting hearing how you guys did your virtual activities during COVID, because when I started, it was COVID. I had to start with virtual right off the bat without even knowing anybody. So yeah, it's very interesting. I'm comparing kind of things that I did that you guys did, and I laughed when you said bingo, because I was like, bingo was a top virtual thing for us, for sure.
Bingo is always going to be the most popular.
Oh yeah,
I just accepted it.
Yeah. I am so curious, with the activities you did or tried, with food and crafts and stuff, you mentioned that you bought all this stuff beforehand and then dropped it off. How long did that take you?
Well,
it depends, because I guess it depends on who's registered, right? Do you do a registration beforehand?
Yeah, so everything was, we moved to, so before COVID, it wasn't as big of a deal. It was a lot more drop-in programs, but during COVID, we had to know numbers for a number of different things. We have the benefit to a certain degree. So the training center is actually down the street from the CHKC apartment buildings, which is a 16-unit apartment building specifically for individuals who are deafblind. And so some of our participants live there, and that makes it easier because you can just drop it off at the apartment building. But other times it would be drives, but we kind of just expected that and built it into our funding and how much our instructors would be paid. And so they would just be paid kilometers and they'd be paid hours, and that would just be part of our costs of running programming during COVID. I think we had a limit, no one would drive, we're in Toronto, and someone wouldn't, if you asked someone to drop something off in, say, Kitchener, which for anybody who doesn't know, it's about an hour and a half away, that'd be too far. But if it was North York to downtown Toronto, and that was a half-hour drive, it was just built into the cost of running programming.
Yeah. So then instead of doing one consecutive amount of hours where it's okay, this next 2 hours we're going to A, B, C, D, did you kind of just do it as needed, up until the activity?
Yeah, and so it would be part of the instructor.
Yeah.
It would be part of their job to figure it into their prep time and everything like that. And so it gave them a lot of leeway. Basically, if they needed to drive for half an hour in order to get to the one consumer, then they would build that into their hours. But it was kind of just knowing that certain things were going to cost more because other things costed less, and it was just built into the way that we ran our programming.
Yeah. Okay. Last question.
Go ahead.
I swear. So when you did have individuals, or if you had individuals that wanted to join in on the Zoom or virtual activities last minute, was that something that was feasible that you were able to do? And if so, how did you do that?
There were a lot of...
I get that, where sometimes I'll get somebody reaching out a day before.
I still get that. I've gotten 3 requests while I've been here. But a lot of it depends on the programming. So for example, the Deafblind Peer Support Group, it's not an RSVP. It's still not, because we have the access built into our programming. And so if you're If you're a sign language user, then we have the interpreters available. If you are like a voiceover user, then we make sure that the audio is really good. And so like programs like that, the accessibility is built in, and we kind of just encourage people to drop in. But for other things like Meal Planning Club or Paint Club, where the supplies are needed and the supplies have already been dropped off, then there was a cutoff date, and that was just basically what we had to do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And then we have one more question in the back.
Oj.
I think we've lost our moderator for a minute, guys.
Hello, my name is Claes Nelfelt. I'm from Sweden.
Jätteintressant, för jag är ju själv ordförande för FSDB.
I think this is very interesting. I'm the president and chair of the Swedish Association, National Association of the Deafblind. And I'd like to share my experience from the same process as you've been through.
När då då fick vi ställa in allting.
When the COVID came, yes, we have to cancel all activities. And we had the same discussions as you had. How can we reach out to our members? Or some kind of activity, some kind of event? Because, as you know, a lot of persons with deaf blindness get really isolated, alone. So within the organization, we had discussions that we should start with Zoom activities. And we were like two groups. One group thought that no, we cannot go on Zoom because it's not accessible. But the other group, where I was in my opinion, was like, no, we should give it a try. We know it's not fully accessible, but we have to try. And it was a success, I must say. And the most popular one that we've had the most popular events where we had most members, attendees, was when deafblind persons themselves shared their own experience and life stories. And as you, exactly the same way as you say that we still use Zoom a lot for different events. So thank you. I just wanted to share. We can use Zoom. It's a good way, actually. A good support. With the right support, you can use Zoom.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me know about your experiences. And that just kind of reminded me something that I oftentimes forget to mention for those who are outside of Canada, outside of Ontario. We have intervenors support people, and our intervenors never stopped working during the pandemic. A lot of the times, during the worst of it, it changed slightly the way in which they interacted with people, but we always had the benefit of having intervenors accessible as long as they were individuals from our organization, from the Canadian Helen Keller Centre. And so for a while, unfortunately, most of our participants were from our own organization, when usually all of our programming is opened up to any individual who is deafblind from any service provider within Ontario. And so we definitely had the added bonus of always having that additional support person available. And so I always made sure that the accessibility was there for individuals who did not have it, but I am also fully aware that we had the benefit of a lot of our programming being able to be more accessible because of that. And a lot of our programming, most of our instructors at the training center are actually deafblind, or blind themselves. And most of our workshop presenters, we try really hard to make sure that they are deaf or blind, because oftentimes we find that those people are the ones who are able to make the information the most accessible to our consumers because they live through it themselves. And so that's actually a very important thing that I try as often as I can to make happen.
So I think we have reached the end of this session, and once again, thank you, Laura, for a lovely presentation and for questions.
Thank you guys so much.